Hello and welcome to the historynetwork.org podcast. If you would like to become a patron of the podcast, please go along to patreon.com/thehistorynetwork and become a patron there. Thank you to all our patrons who make this podcast possible. The historynetwork.org podcast, season 32, episode 10. The White Death, Finnish marksman Simo Häyhä. This episode was written by Murray Darm. Murray is an ancient and medieval military historian from New Zealand living in Australia. He has written more than 100 articles on various aspects of ancient and medieval military history, as well as other historical topics from all periods, ranging from the history of opera to the runic alphabet and recipients of the Victoria Cross. He is the author of Macedonian Phalangite versus Persian Warrior, Athenian Hoplite versus Spartan Hoplite, and Leuctra 371 BC, all from Osprey Publishing. He is regular on the Ancient Warfare podcast and also writes for us regularly. Simo Häyhä tormented Soviet forces invading his native Finland between December 1939 and March 1940, killing 542 enemy soldiers in only 98 days. In the hostile minus 40-degree conditions of the Finnish winter of 1939-1940, a man clad all in white lay with packed snow mounded in front of him as he awaited his enemy. The man was Simo Häyhä, and he was armed with only a regulation bolt-action rifle. He preferred the standard sight, as it could not fog over or catch the light, and was less conspicuous than a telescopic sight. Next to him lay his sub-machinegun, and he was no less deadly with that weapon. During the Winter War, Häyhä's accurate sniper fire would account for almost an entire battalion of Russian soldiers. Simo Häyhä was born in December 1905 in Kiiskinen, a village in the Rautjärvi municipality in southern Finland, very close to the border with Russia. His birthplace fell within the borders of the Soviet Union from the conclusion of the Winter War in 1940, and remains within Russia's borders. Raised as a farmer, a hunter, and a shooter, Häyhä also enjoyed skiing, and he would utilize all of these skills to great effect during the Winter War against the invading Soviets. Tensions between Finland and Soviet Russia had been on the rise since the Russian Revolution in 1917. Finland had been conquered by Russia in the early 19th century and then turned into an autonomous buffer state, the Grand Duchy of Finland. In December 1917, however, with a civil war raging in Russia, Finland saw its chance and declared itself independent. Russian forces attempted to interfere in Finnish affairs, but Bolshevik troops were expelled in 1918, and Finland then joined the League of Nations in 1920. The same year, a treaty was signed at Tartu between Finland and Soviet Russia, recognizing the old borders between Russia and the Duchy of Finland. Tensions continued, as did incidents along the border. A non-aggression pact was signed between the two countries in 1932, and this was reconfirmed in 1934, designated to last 10 years. In 1938, however, the Soviet attitude to Finland changed, and demands were made that Finland must cede land to the Soviets to protect the approaches to Leningrad on the Karelian Isthmus and the islands which guarded the approaches by sea. These demands were refused. Finland had already begun mobilizing its troops with training exercises and building fortifications. Soviet forces began to concentrate from 1938 onwards. On November 26th, the Russian village of Menila was purportedly shelled. The Soviets claimed that this had been done by the Finns and demanded that Finnish troops move back 20 kilometres from the border. The Finns denied responsibility for the shelling of Menila, and it is highly likely the attack on it was staged by Soviet forces in order to provide them with a pretext for invasion and an excuse to declare the non-aggression pacts of 1932 and 1934 null and void. On the 30th of November 1939, the Russians began a massive invasion of Finland all along the border with 23 divisions. It is very clear that the Soviets had planned this invasion for some time. No declaration of war was made by Russia, and the League of Nations condemned it, expelling Soviet Russia from the League. Simo Häyhä grew up in the context of the growing tensions between Finland and Soviet Russia. One of his brothers was killed during the brief Finnish Civil War in 1918. His home was in the Karelian Isthmus, very close to the Russian border, and he was the seventh of 8 children. The family lived on an 80-acre farm, part of which was thick with forest, and farm life revolved around growing crops, various types of livestock, as well as felling trees and hunting. Simo loved work on the farm and enjoyed the physical challenges it brought. He decided early on that he would take over running the farm from his father, and he worked it until the outbreak of the war in 1939. His hard-working lifestyle meant that he remained in top physical condition despite his relatively small stature. During the 1930s, he became an excellent hunter of all types of game and in all the different types of conditions the Karelian Isthmus offered. All of these would be of immense benefit to Simo as a soldier. Simo had also joined the Suojeluskunta Civil Guard as a 17-year-old in 1922. Farming was a valued profession, and so Civil Guard duties usually took place on weekends, allowing working men such as Häyhä to miss as little time away from their farms as possible. Issued with rifles, ammunition was in short supply, but members were also given the tools and materials to reload their own ammunition. This meant Simo could practice at home, and when later asked how he became so good as a marksman, his terse response was simply practice. In the civil guard of the Rautjärvi and the Viipuri regions, he quickly became noted as a marksman, becoming master shooter in various platoons and winning several competitions for shooting. His lifestyle as a hunter meant that he was a natural shooter. In his first competition, he scored 93 out of 100 at a distance of 300 metres. During the war, Häyhä also became particularly adept with the Sumoi KP-31 sub-machine gun. Häyhä served his conscription duty with a bicycle battalion for 15 months from 1925 to 1927 and was promoted to corporal during this conscription period. Due to his marksmanship, he attended sniper training in 1938, and at some point before that he had upgraded his Westinghouse rifle to the Seiko M2830. Simo's rifle became famous, its serial number publicised, and in February 1940 he was presented with a specially built one. He had also trained in the operation of the Lahti light machine gun. It was the light machine gun squad he represented in shooting competitions. At the outbreak of the war, Häyhä was serving with the light or Jaeger infantry regiment 34, JR34, and served with them for 98 of the war's 105-day length. When the Winter War began on November 30th, 1939, 23 Russian divisions invaded at various points along the Finnish border. It came as no surprise to the Finns. They had been building fortifications since April that year in the growing tensions between the two countries. The training tactics of the various civil guards units meant that they were well prepared, even if vastly outnumbered, to deal with conditions and enemy combatants in local areas. The Soviet Union invaded Finland with 750,000 men. They expected an easy victory. The entire Finnish army numbered only 300,000 men, and the Soviets expected little resistance to their frontal assaults. They had just defeated Poland with relative ease. The Russians had also had successes against the Japanese at Khalkhin Gol in the east between May and September 1939. The terrain into which they now poured, however, had few roads, and by attacking so late in the year, they played directly into the Finns' hands. In fact, temperatures fell to minus 43 degrees centigrade during the winter, and the Finns, used to such a harsh environment and with the proper equipment to endure it, were easily able to master the Soviet forces who were not issued with proper equipment and were not used to the conditions. The Finnish forces were able to repel the Soviet attacks and inflict heavy losses on them. The Soviets attempted to emulate the blitzkrieg tactics they had seen Germany use in Poland, but were not helped in that the majority of their military leadership had been purged by Stalin in the 1930s. Almost 40,000 officers were purged, half the Soviet officer corps. It was not only in manpower that the Soviets outnumbered the Finns. The Finns had only 32 tanks and barely more than 100 aircraft. The Soviets brought more than 6,000 tanks to bear and had almost 4,000 aircraft. These mattered little, however, due to the poor roads and the 1,300-kilometre border, which was only able to be crossed where these roads existed, and the Finns defended these points in depth. The Finns were short of equipment and ammunition, but were able to arm themselves with Russian equipment. Häyhä was stationed at Suvalahti and initially went forward to Pyhäjoki, erecting barbed wire and digging foxholes, but the Finnish units were soon overwhelmed and withdrew back to Suvalahti with orders to hold off the Russian onslaught. Once again the Finns were forced to retire, this time to the Kola River, some 30 kilometres away, and there they would halt the Russian advance, and Simo Häyhä would become a legend. He had already gained the nickname Taika Ampuja, magic shooter. Another was Simuna. Häyhä's commanding officer, Lieutenant Arne Juutilainen, had served in the French Foreign Legion and was known by the nickname Horror of Morocco. He knew of Häyhä's skills and, rather than assign him to a particular squad, made him a sniper. It was Juutilainen's reply to a question from Major General Valdemar Hagelund which became and remains a symbol of determination and perseverance in Finland. Asked, "Will Kola hold?" Juutilainen simply replied, "Kola will hold." At Kola, one Finnish division, the 12th, held off 4 Russian divisions, the 56th, 75th, 128th and the 164th, as well as 1 tank brigade, for the duration of the war. Fighting was fierce, and the Russians managed to penetrate Finnish defences on several occasions, only to be counter-attacked and driven back by the Finns. Throughout the Kola campaign, the Finns suffered 1,500 casualties, but inflicted 8,000 on the Russian invaders. One tactic the Finns used to great effect was motti tactics, splitting up the enemy divisions into small pockets where the outnumbered Finns were able to inflict heavy losses on the invading Soviets. In Finnish, motti means stacks of firewood, chopped up and stacked in manageable piles in different locations. Other definitions consider that the encircling tactic was called motitus, the formation of an isolated block, or motti, in the sense of bite-sized. Another derivation is that the isolated block could be cut down, like firewood. It was this name that the Finns applied to their tactics for dealing with the invading Soviets. The invading Russians only used the few roads available, whereas the Finns, using ski troops, were able to easily traverse the inhospitable terrain. Using these troops, the Finns cut the supply lines of the invading forces and split the Soviet divisions into smaller pockets of men, destroying each of these pockets one by one. Whilst not necessarily encircled, the Finns did not have enough troops to do so. The conditions and inability of the Soviets to travel without use of the limited roads meant that the Soviet troops could not easily reconnect with their supply lines, and the threat of Finnish ski troops remained. Finnish counter-attacks could also come from any direction, and these inflicted heavy losses on Soviet forces and left them exhausted because of the continuous state of anxiety. The mechanized units of the Soviets were especially restricted to roads, and even though the Finns had limited anti-tank capabilities, they were able to improvise and isolate these columns and destroy large amounts of Soviet material. When large amounts of Molotov cocktails became available to Finnish forces, produced by the Alko Beverage Corporation, they were able to inflict even further losses. The paucity of ammunition meant that Häyhä was trained to make every shot count. It also helped that the standard Russian rifle, the Mosin Nagant M1891, used the same caliber ammunition as Finnish rifles, and the Finn troops could replenish their supplies from the fallen enemy. Another skill which was highly appreciated in Finland was rapid reloading. One story relates that Häyhä fired 16 shots with his bolt-action rifle for 16 hits at a target 150 metres away in 1 minute, one accurate shot every 3.75 seconds. At the collar, Häyhä put all of his skills to the test. He was adept at choosing a firing position and of not being seen, knowing that if his muzzle flash was seen by the enemy, he would give his position away. During the first month of the war, Häyhä was able to shoot 138 enemy combatants. On December the 1st, he managed to shoot 25 men in a single day. It is worth remembering that there were less than 7 hours of daylight during that period, which makes Häyhä's accomplishments all the more remarkable. By the time he was severely wounded on March the 6th, he had 259 confirmed sniper kills, although many put the actual total much higher. He also took out almost as many enemy combatants with his sub-machine-gun. Several of Häyhä's missions were to take out enemy snipers, and he engaged in sniper duels on several occasions. Early encounters, where Häyhä spotted his enemy because of the glinting of the low sun off the scopes of Russian snipers, convinced him to never use such weapons. They were not the weapons he had trained with or knew in any case. Häyhä's exploits were soon taken advantage of by Finnish propaganda, and he was feared by his Russian opponents. The nickname "the White Death," Valkoinen Kuolema in Finnish, Belaya Smet in Russian, was given to him by Finnish newspapers and caught on. Perhaps it was originally a reference to the many layers of white clothing he wore, which made him resemble a snowman, according to contemporaries. During the 3 months of the Winter War, Häyhä was again promoted to lead a squad of his own, although the date is not known. On March 6, 1940, he was hit in the left jaw with an exploding bullet. The use of such bullets had been banned by the international treaty, but Russians continued to employ them. Häyhä was leading a squad in a counter-attack against unrelenting Russian pressure as the Russian 128th Division sought to break the Kola defences through the Ulisma forest yet again. He had already accounted for 40 enemy soldiers, a new record, when he was struck at 1,400. The bullet blew away his jaw and several teeth. He later recalled that, "Suddenly there was a shot from maybe 50 to 100 metres away, and I felt I was hit. I just felt a suppressed bang in my mouth and I lost consciousness." He was pulled from the front line by his comrades and rushed by lap sled, pulled by his men for medical attention. He fell into a coma and did not regain consciousness until after the armistice was declared on March the 13th. Eventually, the Russian superiority in numbers of men and equipment told, and a Soviet victory was achieved in late March, taking 11% of Finnish territory, especially in Karelia, to secure Leningrad's flank, only 32 kilometres from the original border. According to some versions of the story of his wounding, Häyhä was actually given up for dead and was only noticed on a pile of corpses some time later. Häyhä was taken to Kinkoma Hospital and began the 26 surgeries he would endure for the next 14 months. After his injury, he was promoted to second lieutenant in August 1940. Häyhä wanted to volunteer to serve during the Continuation War in 1941, but was refused as his injuries were considered too serious. He returned to farming and hunting and became a successful hunting dog breeder. He was especially respected as a moose hunter. After the war, when his home was relocated within the Soviet Union, Simo moved to his brother's farm in Utula in neighbouring Ruokolahti, which remained inside Finland. He was eventually compensated for the land he had lost and was given land in Utula. He then moved to Valkjärvi, where he farmed a 4-hectare plot. He remained in Ruokolahti until the age of 95, only then moving to the Kaimi Institute for Disabled Veterans in Hamina in 2001. He died there in April 2002 at the age of 96. It was long thought that Häyhä left no diary or notes, but a chance discovery in 2017 revealed his handwritten 12-page account entitled Sotamuistoja, or War Memorial. Written in August 1940, the diary covered the dates of the 13th of November 1939 to the 13th of March 1940, covering the entire Winter War, which concluded on that date, and also marked the day he recovered consciousness. The diary reveals how Häyhä maintained a sense of humour during the dark moments of the war, and it shows a willingness to talk about the war, a willingness which did not continue after. He also had a very straightforward attitude towards his service. I did what I was told to do as well as I could. There would be no Finland unless everyone else had done the same. The continuing tensions with the Soviet Union meant that the Finns who had fought against Russia during the winter and continuation wars were not respected or feted in post-war Finland. Despite that, however, Simo Häyhä is respected today as one of the greatest snipers and marksmen to ever shoot, a reputation affirmed by the conditions under which he shot and the fact that he used an unmodified standard bolt-action rifle. Well, thank you once again, Murray, for writing another script for us, and thank you to all of you for joining us during season 32. Once again, if you would care to become a patron, we would love to have you as one, and you can do so by going to patreon.com/The History Network. Thank you once again to all our patrons who do make this podcast possible. Well, thanks again for listening. You've been listening to the HistoryNetwork.org podcast, written by Murray Dahm, read by Nick Barker.